How would you solve this equation? For most of us, it's as simple as following a series of familiar steps to get us to that answer. Now, remember this. This is how students under Common Core were taught to solve the exact same question. First adopted in 2009, Common Core was an ambitious initiative to revolutionize the American education system. 41 states, the District of Columbia, and 4 territories signed up to participate. National leaders from Bill Gates to President Obama supported the idea of the Common Curriculum, and it cost an estimated $15.8 billion to implement.
They thought standards were just too low in the U.S. and that we could have kids learn more in school if we raise standards. Quite frankly, they didn't really trust the schools to do this on their own.
One of the most challenging aspects was we understood our curriculum and we were basically thrown a curveball into what it was and had to really adopt new practices.
But a couple of years after its launch, it was met with confusion and ridicule.
Some of the math items that were mocked, I think, deserved to be mocked, frankly. They were just very poor items.
People deserve to know the truth, but it wasn't the truth. I was 15 in 1977, and I'll be 30 next week.
I don't think that math checks out.
I don't get math. I went to school in the 2000s, and we were taught Common Core.
All of a sudden, parents were having to help their kids with math homework that they couldn't quite grasp because they hadn't been taught math that way.
So, how can the U.S. fix our lagging school system? Can a common curriculum work? The Common Core is a set of standards specifically designed to better prepare American students for success in college and their workplace. These standards determine what a student should know and be able to do in language arts and math from kindergarten through senior year of high school.
When you should know algebra, should it be 8th grade, should it be 9th grade, should you be capable of doing algebra 1 or algebra 2? You know, when would it be appropriate to move into calculus, things of that nature.
It's important to have a standard because you have to have a clear vision or goal of where you are going and what it is that you expect for your students. I think that if you go in without any expectations for your students, they themselves are going to be unclear, right? What it is that they are showing up to school every single day to achieve.
Besides setting these benchmarks, Common Core also brought changes to how students were taught.
There definitely was a shift, especially in just your thought and thinking about how you approach lesson plans and how you are going to make sure that you are disseminating the information in a way to your students that they can receive it.
Do you know the Pythagorean theorem, right? Like, okay, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. You can probably ask any adult and they can shoot that back to you. It was more about if you have that knowledge, if you understand what it is, where do you use that? How do you apply it?
On the language arts side, there was much more of a focus on moving a little bit away from fiction to much more focus on the critical thinking using real live documents like studying Hamilton papers or something like that to really understand what was going on at that time of the revolution.
There were 2 main reasons why the initiative received so much support in its early years. The first was fear that America was lagging behind other countries in academic performance. In 2009, the U.S. showed middling performance in reading and science and scored below average in mathematics, compared to the average score among OECD countries.
The idea was we're going to hold schools responsible for teaching to a higher level and then test kids to see whether or not they've attained that higher level.
The second reason was that the Common Core allowed different states to accurately compare their academic performances by having a uniform standard for education.
And while one state might now say, we're doing a great job of achieving our standards, but these standards are very low, and another state is saying, we're not doing as well as we'd like to be doing in achieving our standards, but they're very high, this makes for a confusing conversation.
With these intentions in mind, 2 nonprofit groups, the Council of Chief State School Officers and the National Governors Association, developed the standards. Achieve, a nonprofit education reform group, as well as various teachers' unions, including the National Education Association and the American Federation of Teachers, joined in to help the process.
So when they got together in 2009, what they did first is they had a memorandum of understanding that they had states sign on to. And it basically said, okay, we're going to go write these standards. You don't have to accept them now, but can you at least say you'll be interested in looking at them and might accept them down the road if you find them to meet your needs? And over 45 states signed on to that memorandum of understanding.
We made sure that we were having K-12 teachers talk to freshmen, sophomore professors to make sure we knew what post-secondary was expecting and making sure we built on those expectations from K through 12.
Since Common Core was a state-led initiative, the federal government did not play a major role in developing the standards. However, it did play a role in promoting them. The Obama administration's Race to the Top fund offered $4.35 billion in grants for states agreeing to adopt any college and career-ready standards.
We will end what has become a race to the bottom in our schools and instead spur a race to the top by encouraging better standards and assessments. Now, this is an area where we are being outpaced by other nations. It's not that their kids are any smarter than ours, it's that they are being smarter about how to educate their children.
In fact, we were hitting bottom in 2009, 2010 in the Great Recession. And so states were desperate for money. The Obama administration put together a recovery package for the states, but one of the requirements was they had to have adopted college and career readiness standards, which is a code word for Common Core. This was seen as Obama administration support for Common Core, and that's not an unfair accusation.
Facing minimal resistance, it seemed as though Common Core would be a guaranteed success.
We had a meeting in 2010 to have all the entities sign off on the adoption of the Common Core. We had unanimous across the state agreement because so many Kentucky teachers had been involved in giving feedback and writing the standards.
But a couple of years later, things took a turn as the efficacy of the new standard came into question. It also didn't help that the Common Core became the subject of ridicule by parents and the media unfamiliar with the concepts taught under the new standard.
A lot of parents were getting homework that came home that they just didn't understand. They thought it was bizarre.
I went through Common Core with my kids, and I remember looking at my daughter and going, I'm not entirely clear what you're doing, so I'm just going to show you long division the way I know it.
It wasn't until a decade later that federally funded research was conducted to find out what the impact of Common Core had on students' performance over time. The results were disappointing.
The studies range from tiny negative effects to tiny positive effects and a lot of neutral effects in the middle. So the one thing we can be pretty certain of is that Common Core did not have a dramatic impact on student achievement in the United States.
Did we raise standards? Yes, we did. Did we raise expectations on assessments? Yes, we did. Have we improved student performance? No.
There are numerous theories as to why the Common Core has failed to improve student performance. But the most popular theory is that the standards took away the control from teachers who always have a better understanding of what their students need.
The idea that you could dictate curriculum to a teacher or dictate instruction to a teacher from kind of remote control from up above and say, well, here it is that you're going to teach is simply unrealistic.
Kids are not cogs in a machine. So we say something is going to happen in third grade, but realistically, for some kids, it happened in second grade. And for some kids, it's not going to happen till fifth grade. The Common Core made that really hard. It really drew a huge spotlight that all kids aren't going to learn things in the same path and really started to mark that as success versus failure.
Another theory is that those who wrote the standards didn't take into account the financial difficulties of students across America. Studies have shown time after time that children who grow up poor are more likely to have poor academic achievement and drop out of high school. Roughly 10.5 million children lived in poverty in the U.S.
A lot of children's needs are not being met within the four walls of their school building. And I think that we see that deficit is even larger for students from low income families, or we have students of color.
As a country, we just have not committed to the underlying problem of student performance, and that is poverty.
Today, Common Core has fallen out of favor. More than 20 of the initial 45 states have either repealed, revised, or edited the standards. 4 states, including Arizona, Oklahoma, Indiana, and South Carolina, have entirely withdrawn from the initiative. Former Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos went as far as to call it a disaster, concluding that the Common Core is dead at the federal level.
I think you are seeing today what kids experience in curriculum kind of is a little bit more blended. It's not the holistic approach that maybe Common Core introduced when we kind of swung completely to that continuum, and parents would look at their children's, third grade homework and go, I don't get it.
I don't think Common Core as such has a future, honestly, now. It was a movement at a particular time. It reached its heyday when we had widespread adoption. And as I said, then there was a retreat from that adoption. Many of the states have held on substantively to elements of that Common Core. But we've moved on.
A few states have also developed a new educational standard as a replacement. On February 12, 2020, Florida officially adopted the Benchmarks for Excellent Student Thinking, or the BEST standards, as a replacement for the Common Core, while New York has developed its own, the Next Generation Learning Standards, that are expected to be implemented by September 2022. Some, however, argue that none of the newer standards would have been possible without the work of Common Core.
The standards that the states have come up with, where they claimed they were different from Common Core, they're really not that much different. In fact, some states just basically took the Common Core label off and then slapped a new label on the package.
So the Common Core is not going to go anywhere. I feel confident in saying that. What I think is probably going to happen is the continued evolution of the implementation of the Common Core. So the standards themselves will probably continue to exist and be anchors for our practice.
What both supporters and the opponents of the original standard do agree on is that Common Core was an initiative doomed to fail from the start, mainly due to its politicalization.
There were people who opposed standardized testing. They tend to be on the political left. They didn't like the Common Core test. It was this left-right coalition that really doomed Common Core politically. It wasn't necessarily evidence coming out that Common Core was effective or not effective.
Once it became politicized, then all bets were off. States that had adopted it began to retreat. People began to relabel their standards, even if they were essentially the same standards. They didn't want the label Common Core because that had become politicized and identified with a political party or a political leader. And the thing began to fall apart.
While the Biden administration has not yet explicitly commented on the matter, experts believe that the federal government will continue to not involve themselves in the future of educational standards.
I don't think you're going to see the Biden administration enthusiastically embrace Common Core.
But experts assure that education in the United States will continue to improve as long as there are those who believe in the importance of education.
The future of education is extraordinary, and it's extraordinarily important because what we need to recognize is that education is the asset our community is built upon. It's the thing that we invest in to ensure community growth.
It matters whether they learn it or they don't. And if they're not learning it, as an individual student or as a subgroup of students, then we have an obligation as the adults in America to do what we can to bring them up to the standard, because the standard is ultimately what they need to survive and thrive in this economy, which is ultimately what we as a society and as a nation need if we're going to survive and thrive as a democracy and as a 21st century international economy.